If you want someone else to be intentional with their outcomes, you have to be intentional with your inputs.
Most people don't leave jobs for money. Most people leave jobs because they're underappreciated.
You can either talk down to someone or you can pick them up.
The thing is, you got to give time, right? The reality is that's what it takes. If you want to replace yourself or you want to develop people or whatever, you got to give them the time.
This isn't one of those ones where like more at-bats will create a better outcome.
No.
More at-bats will create more problems. Welcome to Marketing from the Edge podcast. I'm Cody Alexander. I've directly generated over $200 million in net revenue over the last 5 years through innovative marketing and a numbers-first strategy. Joined with me is my dad. John Alexander has become the go-to expert in the direct marketing field, generating over $1.5 billion in revenue over the last 5 years. Sought by both board of directors and nine-figure businesses, he is an owner/founder of Centurion Publishing and is on the journey of growing this brand new business from 0 to 100 million in annual revenue. Today, John is going to share with you his proven model for developing a team that will do anything for you and follow you anywhere. And I've been assured, without being a cult leader. Discover how to grow a great team without splurging on massive salaries and trying to headhunt from your competitors. The key to a great team is a great leader. We will give you the framework we use to hire the right people, keep them without bloating salaries, and make them great so your business makes money for you. So it blows me away at the company we both worked at originally. After you end up leaving, I can't tell you how many people reached out to me and were like, man, I loved working for your dad and I really appreciate everything he did. Like, I got so many positive comments. It got to the point where the owner of the company I'm at now is like, whatever he's doing, you should do that. And I don't disagree with him one bit. Like, how'd you pull that off?
So one of the benefits of being in business for a lot of years and working at a lot of different places and doing a lot of different things is you can make a shitload of mistakes and nobody knows about them, right? It's like being a parent. I think 0 to 5 is your training ground because nobody remembers anything from 0 to 5 or very little.
Yeah.
So
only your spouse.
Yeah, exactly. For me, developing a team is a big deal. So I have fundamental philosophies. And one of them always was growing up, watching people be miserable and go to work every day for money. I'm like, you get one life, as far as we know, you get one life. Right? The only thing you have is time and you're exchanging it for $1. Why not enjoy what the hell you're doing?
Right.
And I also have a fundamental belief that anybody can be a superstar somewhere, right? I've seen some people that couldn't work an Excel file to save their life and jump on the phone and they could talk people into anything.
Yep.
So job function isn't necessarily reflective of intelligence or self-worth or any of the other shit that everybody wants to tie all this stuff to, right?
Right.
The fact that 60% of this country wake up every day and go to a job that they hate. You got themes like, working for the weekend and Monday or whatever, right? Mondays are a fifth of your life or 7th of your life, right? A fifth of your work life. Why not enjoy the damn thing? So that's a big deal to me. Most people don't leave jobs for money. Most people leave jobs because they're underappreciated.
They don't like their boss.
Yeah. Their boss treats them shitty, right? They're in a different situation than they were when they first started. Right. Yes, there's those things that happen in life, right? Divorce, death, like all those things occur that impact things. But the vast majority of people, they leave one set of problems to go to a job with another set of problems. They're just changing problems, right?
Yep.
Every job's got them. And so the fact is that you should really, to me, enjoy what you're doing, right? The way you enjoy what you're doing is from a business owner, from the guy, quote unquote, in charge, is number one, treat your people like you'd want to be treated if things were reversed, right?
Yep.
And for me, people don't work for me, they work with me. And I know, that's a big little catchphrase, but who gives a shit, right? The fact is most people say it and don't ever actually do it, right? The reality is that the higher up you get, the more people you report to, not the other way around. And yes, there's some frustrations, right? As I leave a team of upwards of 100 people that knew exactly how I worked. And now I'm building a team that now I got to go in and dive in again.
Right.
Like show up to meetings on time, right? Focus on the shit that we're supposed to focus on and get off your damn laptop when you're in the meeting, right? Like turn on your Zoom screen and don't hide behind a black screen, right? Those are things that are important to me that ultimately where I came from, everybody knew. And now this one, I got to build them out. But really, I think ultimately there's a few ways that you can really, you got to hire correctly. And we talked about hiring last time around. One of my favorite sayings is you got to keep crazy out of the building.
Yeah.
But once you get somebody in the building that has the right core values, has the right culture, now it's your job as the person, quote unquote, in charge. It's to develop them, right? Bring them along, make them part of a team. And most managers, right? If you look at most functions, I learned this from the military, that your job as being quote unquote the person in charge is that if you leave, the whole entire team still functions just as well without you there.
Right.
The value in you is not being the one there to make all the decisions and do everything else. And you're like, nobody can do anything without me. That's not valuable. That's a shitty existence. And the fact is, most people don't want to work for you. And how are you ever going to move up?
That's a train with no brakes.
Exactly.
You have one failure and the whole thing falls apart. You're like, that's collateral damage. That's not healthy. You're not valuable at that point. You're dangerous.
Exactly. Figure out who needs your time and attention, one-on-one time and attention, and then empower them to make decisions and don't shit on them when they make bad ones.
Right.
But even within your team, you hire correctly, you're going to get in your team, right? There's going to be ones that you can feed into that will move up. And there's others that are just really good at their job.
Right.
Right. So
yeah, they're a specialist.
Yeah. People call them A and B players. You can use whatever term you want, but a company doesn't need all leaders. It needs some people to do the work. Right. And you need both sides. You want highly skilled, highly empowered people doing the initial functions, but you also need those that are thinking, right, and providing strategy and direction to those that are doing the tactical part.
One of the most important parts of all of it are like everything comes down to questions.
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
It does.
And it's the questions you have. It's the questions they have. It's the questions behind the question. And then it's the questions they're not asking.
That some people don't believe it, that are capable of it. Some people think they can do it, that aren't capable of it.
Yep.
Right. And your job is to try to get the ones in the right place to do that, because the stronger your team, the stronger you are. You move yourself up, or you make more money as a business owner, whichever. And you ultimately can grow and develop.
Yep. I think that just like anything else, it is a skill set, right? Like it is something where you can go out and you can learn how to be the best version of yourself to do it. That doesn't mean you'll be the best in the world. You can be the best version of yourself for developing a team. And frankly, the people who go out there and invest the time to do it generally get better results over a longer time horizon than the person who's just going to try to push the boulder up beside, all by themselves.
Exactly. So let's talk about two aspects out of that, right? Let's talk about the team first, right? To me, in developing an entire team, it's about transparency, right? Most people want to do better at their job. The vast majority of people want to do better at their job. If they feel appreciated, they come in, they want to kick ass at the job. Most people don't wake up today and say, you know what, I'm going to go in and do the shittiest job I can do. Yeah. Especially if they just got the job, right? So nobody acts like that. What develops that? They don't get the big picture, right? They don't really understand how it all goes. And people are told, hey, you don't need to worry about that. That's not your job as an employer or as an employee.
And I think one thing too is some people, like if you ask them like, hey, what's our best product or what's working well right now or whatever, they can answer the question. But if you ask them why, that's the kicker.
Yeah, exactly.
If someone can tell you what it is, but they can't tell you why, it's not because they just don't get it. Probably no one's communicated it to them. And frankly, just like in communication, if you've done it before, it's all about repetition. Because you like, I told them that before. Well, how many times?
Yeah, exactly.
Did you say it in passing? Did you say it? Was it to a group and they just happened to be there? And you're like, well, they were there. They should know. Well, maybe they didn't think you were talking to them. And again, communication, the questions, that is what the difference in my eyes, especially like being coached up by you, is it wasn't all the reports that were put together that made me a better marketer. It was the questions you asked me and the questions I asked you.
The other question, how do I develop at the team level? First thing is have a weekly meeting with the entire friggin' team.
Right.
And at the end of that meeting, I like weekly meetings, but ultimately I got to monthly meetings because there was no reason to meet on a weekly basis. I had certain things that I wanted to cover that impacted the entire team. And then the second half of the whole entire thing, I opened it up to questions. And just by opening myself up and saying, hey, look, any questions, comments, concerns, anything you want to share, it just made me more approachable. Yes, people are asking relevant questions in a large environment, and people that ask stupid ass questions in that environment eventually leave the company, which is fine because that identifies that. But ultimately, it allows everybody to come along and realize that, holy crap, like he actually cares about us, And I might get 2 or 3 questions and I'd go until I ran out of questions. And I did that on a weekly basis. And it was just a half an hour. Like it was 3 things that I wanted to cover. Like there's nothing wrong to me with sharing your gross revenue with a company. There's nothing proprietary about that. Shit, every company on Wall Street shares their gross revenue.
Yeah.
And ultimately, if people understand, like there's only one purpose of business. It's to make money.
Yep.
And the fact that the vast majority of people, what they can impact is the gross, not the net.
Yep. I want to go back real quick to the weekly meetings. I think that what's so interesting about it is if you show up and you ramble, people will know. Because you're unprepared.
Yeah. I had a note card.
Yeah. Anyone who's competent knows when you're prepared. And you want to speak to the people who are competent.
Yep.
And so when you show up unprepared, it's almost as if like, in some ways it's worse because people are like, oh, well.
And you got to show up on time. Right? If the meeting's at 11 and you show up at 11:05, you can't complain when your entire team always misses their deadlines.
Yeah.
Right? Because who'd they learn it from? You. So show up prepared.
You need to show up with something to say and be intentional. If you want someone else to be intentional with their outcomes, you have to be intentional with your inputs. And if you can't do that, then, you kind of have to be willing to be resigned to you get what you get.
Exactly. Okay, so that's a short, quick primer on developing your team, right? If you just did those things, you showed up and you did a weekly meeting, you shared something with them at high level that they wouldn't normally have access to before, and you include them, they feel appreciated, and you open yourself up to questions, and you answer them as transparently as you can. Even when we're in the middle of actually downsizing, going through layoffs, people are like, hey, are we going to get laid off? Like, I can't guarantee you. Like, what I can guarantee is get up, bust your ass each day, and you got to let the outcome be the outcome.
Yeah.
Right. So I didn't dodge anything, but at the same time, you shared what was going. I think that's the fastest and quickest way to start to develop your team.
Yeah. Just to close the loop on my thoughts on it, ask them great questions. Let them ask you any question.
Yep.
Look at the question behind the question, because generally you'll be like, well, that's a dumb question. There probably is some behind it. And then think about the questions they're not asking.
And if it's a dumb question, and it's mostly because they don't know anything, because they weren't included in anything,
or they just like, it came from the last job they're at. And you're like, hey, that's not how it works here. And it's just a course corrector. And then the second thing for me developing a team is, you can either talk down to someone or you can pick them up.
Absolutely.
And generally, in my experience, anyone I've brought on, the people who've been talked down to and berated and beat up are broken people, and they're broken employees. And that's what scares me most. I never want to break somebody like that, because it's super easy to do, because you work together 5 days a week over the course of 1, 3, 4 years. Like, that's a lot of someone's life. And you can either make them a better person by the time they're ready to go do the next thing, or you can make them a miserable person when they go to do the next thing.
Exactly. I think that's a great point. Okay, so that's developing the team. Let's identify the 1 or 2 bodies out of the team that you need to develop to replace yourself. There's 1,000 ways to do it. There's one way that I found is most effective to do it. And unfortunately, it takes a bunch of time. It's you feeding into them on a regular basis. And so the way I did it, and the way I do it in general, is I have a weekly call that's roughly 1 to 2 hours with typically the 2, no more than 3 individuals that you identified that you want to bring along.
Right.
And you show up with something you want to share, and then you open it up to them to ask questions on what went on that week and why you made the decisions you did. What you're really trying to do, it's really hard for most of us to write down a list of like, these are all the things you need to learn in order to be in this job, right? Some of the stuff just happens. When you've been in a job and you've done a role for a while, you just do things, and then somebody goes, hey, why are you doing that? You're like, oh, that's a great question. Like, this is why I did it, right? This is what's going on within that world. And maybe, depending on the role, maybe you can get away with a half an hour, but it has to be scheduled, because otherwise it's not important. And if it's not important, they don't feel important. If they don't feel important, they're never going to develop. You've got to answer the questions on what you're doing, even if you're like, hey, I don't know exactly why I did that. Like, let me think about that. And you have to empower them to make those decisions like we talked about before, and then step privately on those decisions if you disagreed with it and go, hey, this is a decision you made. We're going to back it. But at the end of the day, this is what I would have done differently, and this is why.
Let me ask you, so in my experience, you generally have two people that you bring up. You have someone that you think has the skill set, the ability, the capability, all that stuff. And then there's someone who has the desire. And sometimes the people that you think has the skill set, the ability, all that isn't great. They may not want it. Right?
Exactly.
And then you have someone who really wants it, but doesn't have the skill set or ability yet. Like, you can't even help them because they don't even know what they don't know yet, right? Like, they don't know what questions to ask. And so it's the difference between trying to teach a 1-year-old how to play baseball, coach pitch baseball, and teaching a 8-year-old how to play coach pitch baseball. You're not trying to equate employees to toddlers, but my point is that
exactly.
They need to learn how to crawl before they can walk, and they need to learn how to walk before they can run. And you have to be able to identify where people are at. If someone has the skill set, the ability, and all of that, but maybe not the desire, and you feel like, hey, I have to force them to develop, how do you address that?
So you brought up the two traits you're looking for, right? People with aptitude and people with attitude. Some people have the right attitude and they don't have the ability. Some people have the right aptitude, but they don't have the desire. I've had both, right? And the way I tend to work it is, more than anything, I tend to use communication, right? So the ones that have the aptitude, but aren't like, hey, I hadn't really thought about that. I don't really know if I want to do that. I just keep talking to them about it, right? Yeah. And you're like, hey, I think you'd be a great manager someday, right? Most of the time, those people never thought about that or went down that route because nobody believed in them. Their spouse doesn't believe in them. The last job they were at didn't believe in them. That's why they're here.
Right.
They don't necessarily believe in themselves, right? They might lack self-confidence. And so what you do is you empower them to start making decisions. The way I did it, when forced empowerment, was I just stopped responding to their Slack messages all day. So instead of slacking me all day long and me answering every single question, I just wouldn't respond all day. And then I show up at 3:00 in the afternoon and say, okay, what do we got? Face to face with them. And what ends up happening is they ultimately have to make those decisions because they had to be made.
Right.
And then you reinforce the fact that they made a good decision, or you calibrate them and help them with the next one. What happens is decision-making is like any other skill. It gets developed over time. And as they start to make those decisions and start to make right ones and get that reinforced on the right ones, and you keep being like, hey, you've got the ability to do this. You just got to have the desire. When you have the desire, I'm here to help. Over time, I found almost all those people eventually stand up, right?
Yeah.
Because now they get the belief in themselves, right? You believe in them, which is way more powerful than what they believe themselves. When their belief gets to that point and they step in, I had one that literally in the past wanted to manage nobody. She just wanted to do her job. To ultimately, she managed the largest team in the marketing department. And that happened over a course of about a 3-year period. It doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
Right? It comes down to when you identify somebody that's got the ability to do it, there's not a ton of people. You have to feed into them and you have to give them time and you have to force them to make decisions. If left to their own devices, most people will show up every day and you sit behind your desk and you'll be exhausted by the time you get done making decisions that they all could have made for themselves.
Yeah. Well, and I think back to your point is some people will work one day, 365 days a year, instead of getting 1 year's worth of experience.
Exactly. They got 1 day's worth of experience, 365 days over.
Yep. Now, say you have someone on the team who maybe has the attitude, but not the aptitude. I feel like I get this question a lot. They'll go, what books should I read? And I can't tell you how hard it is for me to answer that question, because the truth is a book's not going to teach you how to be a better marketer, right? The only thing that's going to teach you how to be better at anything is by applied knowledge, taking what you know today and using it, and then trying to incrementally improve it every single day by doing something slightly different or learning something different. It's not like going to a degree. I have a degree. Now I'm qualified for this. It's not how it works.
Exactly.
So how do you handle that?
I've got a saying that I use, and it's really a reminder to myself, more than anybody else, is to be unclear is to be unkind. Because in the past, I wasn't as clear with people that had a desire to do something, but not an aptitude to do something, right? They had the right attitude and they're like, I want to lead, but had no ability to lead. Ultimately, you can develop managers. I think you can develop leaders too. I've seen it done, especially in the military. We saw it done all the time, but it definitely takes time and energy and effort. If they got the right attitude, they ultimately have to get the right aptitude to go along with it. And if they can't develop the aptitude, they can't do it. I usually sit down with them, first of all, and 9 times out of 10, that person's actually better off at a different company on a much smaller scale so they can get the skill set. If you're a $10 million company and you've got somebody that's at this level, sometimes as they go down to $1 million company, they're not as quote unquote dangerous, right? They're much less at risk and they get time to develop those skills, right? So that's one way to do it. Let me just share one other thing. I always had 2 entirely different teams. I had a management team and a kind of supervisory style team at almost every company. And the supervisors are the guys that you're developed to be managers. When the company's small, I do that meeting like I did with you, helping you come along. That's once a week for a couple hours, answering questions or whatever. And then I do a group meeting with the rest of them once a month, just doing the exact same thing, but it's a lot less time commitment of mine.
Right.
As the company gets bigger and I didn't have the time to do that, I just hired an outside business coach that worked with those guys on a regular monthly basis that helped develop them along, right? That's their only job, right? Is to help develop people. And 90% of my job is running the company, right? 10% is bringing on the bodies and mentoring. When you have the revenue, but you don't have the time, pass it off to another entity that can come in, because some of those people will develop, believe it or not, right? It just takes them longer.
Right. And I think one part about it that is really hard to appreciate is that this isn't one of those ones where like more at-bats will create a better outcome.
No.
More at-bats will create more problems.
Yeah, because they practice poorly because they don't know what they're doing, right? And so I could practice tennis all day long and I'm still going to be a shitty tennis player, right? Because I don't have anybody coaching me on exactly what to do. So all I'm going to do is reinforce bad habits and ultimately just still be shitty.
And that's where talking about taking someone and going down a level and actually getting a better outcome, right? Is that like, 1, your feedback loop is smaller. 2, talking about being dangerous, you're far less dangerous, right? And so the collateral damage is reduced. So when the collateral damage is reduced, it makes it very easy to pinpoint. Here's what you did. Here's what went wrong.
Exactly.
The more people you have, right, the more variation the problem is. And so it's hard to pinpoint, well, what did you do wrong? You're like, well, Timmy didn't like that you did it this way, and Bill didn't like that you did it that way, and Stephanie was super upset that you did. All of a sudden, they're getting barraged, and it's overwhelmed. Like, you can't actually improve because more at-bats only creates more problems.
Exactly. And the thing is, you got to give time, right? The reality is that's what it takes. If you want to replace yourself or you want to develop people or whatever, you got to give them the time. I did it on Fridays for 2 hours, blocked out the time, an hour before I would normally have started, right? An hour into that. So I really gave up an hour, but ultimately you develop people that will follow you anywhere, right? I've left jobs and almost every place I've left, I've had people want to follow along and come somewhere else. And
that's amazing.
Yeah, because they love working with you, right? They love the way they're treated, the way they feel, they're inspired, right? And I think that doesn't happen overnight. That happens by feeding into people. So, you've got to figure out the time. Got to figure out the time commitment. You can't say you're too busy because otherwise you'll be too busy forever.
Go out there, invest the time, invest in your people, because I'll tell you get a far better outcome bringing people up from within than bringing outside talent and taking on all their baggage.
1,000%.
All right. Good luck out there. Go make some money. You've been listening to Marketing from the Edge podcast. If you want to hear more of our thoughts every week, visit marketingedgepod.com. We'll share more of our very best lessons, thoughts, strategies for growing a business, as well as some personal stories here from the edge of the world. Invest a couple minutes of your morning and we'll give you the blueprint to growing your business from where it's at today to where you want it to be. That's marketingedgepod.com. If you want to reach out to us directly, feel free to email cody@marketingedgepod.com and you might get a surprise bonus. Next week, we're going to reveal our 7-step framework that we've used to build a business that makes you rich. This framework is our secret to ethically 10xing your next product launch without spending a truckload of money on advertising. If you want a shortcut to getting your audience excited about what you're doing next and begging you to let them have access to your next product, this episode is for you.